Grace to you and peace in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Those of you know I'm still in school, so I was applying for a study grant fairly recently, so I can, don't kind of pay out of my own pocket for what I'm studying. And the application asked me to include my most recently updated resume. So I spent some time updating my work history that I've done over the past year as I last looked at it. And as I was reflecting on my professional record, I began to ask myself, does this really define me and what I do, much less as a Christian? I included the committees that I've been on, the boards whose meetings I sat in, the ministries here at the church that have begun, and my wider church obligations, etc. But there wasn't any space, say, for the prayers I've prayed with people. I can add how many hospital visits I've made, but there's no room to measure how impactful those visits were. I could include the number of pastoral activities, such as baptisms, weddings, and funerals, but what does that really say? What does that tell anyone? I couldn't find the column where I could add the quick conversation in the lobby after church that seemed to help someone see a new perspective. Or the crazy conversation I had with the half-drunk guy at the pub who felt free to share his thoughts on organized religions with me after overhearing the bartender refer to me as pastor. I really hate that. And there was no space for the time I was just a listening ear or a caring presence. No time for the mornings I've stared at a computer, blank screen, wondering what, if anything, of worth I can share with you on a Sunday morning. Nothing about how I keep my own faith life strong so that I can serve more faithfully in my role. And even more strange was they didn't ask where God was active and alive in my life or of yours. They asked what I've done, nothing about what God was doing or had done in my world. Where has God repaired my brokenness? Where has God taught me the hard lessons of life and faith? Where has God rescued me from the pit of despair? Where is the power of the crucified and risen Jesus alive in my life? Those would be more interesting questions, don't you think? And they didn't even ask about you. I think asking about you would be important questions to ask, since you are my crazy partner in this crazy journey we have together. They didn't ask where you have been faithful to God's call on your life. They didn't ask where you were the listening ear or the caring presence, or when you prayed for someone who was hurting, or when you visited someone in the hospital, or befriended someone who was alone, or when you gave generously to help alleviate suffering in another part of the world. They didn't ask what areas of growth you are resisting, or what dreams God put before you that you are actively pursuing, or what keeps you from living the life that God has put in front of you. They didn't ask where the crucified and risen Jesus was alive in you. You weren't a forethought or an afterthought. It was as if you don't exist in my life or my work. But the theological assumptions of the questions I was asked are astounding if you think about it. A generous interpretation would be that they just assume that God's love and power and grace is undergirding everything that I and we have done together who bear Christ's name. A less generous interpretation would be that the Christian life is based on human activity, done with religious veneer, rather than placing Jesus at the center of all that we do as a community that is joined to Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and ascension in holy baptism. But I can see why they ask those questions and not other questions. Numbers of home visits are easy to quantify. Baptisms, weddings, and funerals are quick calculations of impact. Growing programming is an indicator of that something's going on here, and we're not just sitting on our hands waiting for things to happen. But that's not the Christian life, is it? Numbers may tell us a story, but they're not the story that God is telling through us. That's why in today's Bible reading, the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Corinth, says this. He says, "We do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake." That's his way of saying that if you're going to stack your resume with anything, start with what God has done with you and has done with your life. It is God who's doing a good thing in your life. It is Jesus who is Lord over you. That's why you become servants. You become slaves for his sake, to serve others and the world that God has created in love. For it is a God who said, "Let light shine out of the darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God and in the face of Jesus Christ. You are the face of Jesus Christ. It is God who shines through you. It's God who lights up your life with the power of divine love. It's God who works through you so that when people see you, they see the love that lights up the universe contained within your frail human framework. Paul says it this way: "We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us." We are the clay jars, if there is any confusion on that. The King James Version uses the more graceful, if less literal term, earthen vessels, but the message is the same. We are the fragile containers that hold the light that illuminates the world. We are the weak that have been made strong in Jesus. We are the mortal, limited ones who have within us the treasure that is God's almighty love and power. But make no mistake, Paul reminds us, this love and power belongs to God and not to us. This is a power that comes from heaven, but finds itself in us, very earthly creatures, and is revealed through us small, weak, limited beings. And that power then becomes known in our weakness. That's the flip side. God's power shines through our weakness. God is more interested in our weakness than in our strength. That's because it is our weaknesses that make us authentically human. And the more authentically human we are, the more we reflect God's image, since we human beings were created in God's image. And that's because it's our weaknesses that bring us closer together as human beings. Common weakness creates intimacy greater than human strength does. You may have seen this as well, but I've noticed that I'm able to have a deeper connection with someone when we share our vulnerabilities, when we expose those parts of our lives that we think some people should be ashamed of, or that real human intimate connection occurs when we share of ourselves. Strength for strength's sake puts up walls between people. It doesn't allow for the weakness of imperfection, because imperfections make us unique. And more interestingly, imperfections make us more beautiful. When I was a pastor in Tokyo, Japan, I attended a workshop on culture shock and how to minister to people who were experiencing it. But I think it was like their way of sharing with those of us whose egos wouldn't allow ourselves to believe we were experiencing culture shock, and so they had a forum to help deal with it. And there was another pastor in that workshop, and when we were asked about the cultural curiosities in Japanese culture that we found a little weird or difficult to handle, this other guy, he blurted out, "The women's teeth." But what? What about the women's teeth? the facilitator asked. All the women have crooked teeth. It's disgusting, he said. Why don't they get them fixed? A little racist, don't you think? Especially with the anger in his voice. But we were there to share openly with what we were feeling, and I'm glad he did so we could talk about it. Actually, the facilitator explained, many young women have dental surgery to make their teeth crooked. For many Japanese people, crooked teeth are a sign of childlike beauty. It's those little imperfections that many young women think makes them look more endearing. It's called yaiba. My Japanese is really bad. But at this, the pastor just grimaced. He goes, I don't care, it's disgusting, he said. And then we had a conversation about the cultural expectations and the baggage we bring with us to foreign countries and how to appropriately express our discomfort. And I hadn't noticed the teeth issue until he noticed it, until he pointed it out. And then I couldn't, not see it. And every time I was on the train or on the street or in the grocery store and I saw the young women, I saw, there it is, there's the crooked teeth. And then I remembered what I learned in the workshop, that the imperfections can be a sign of enduring childlike beauty. And I loved that insight from the facilitator. And it reminded me of the Japanese practice of kintsugi, or it's the repairing broken pottery with gold, to emphasize fractures or breaks rather than hiding them, making the repaired piece of pottery more beautiful than the original. I find that a lovely practice. Instead of hiding fractures or breaks, they repair them with gold. Those earthen vessels, those clay jars, are valued more when they break than when they are whole. And of course, that may be a cosmetic example, but that's how God sees us. We, the earthen vessels, the clay jars, are more valued when we're put back together again after we break than when we are supposedly whole. Our losses can give us compassion. Our defeats can show us humility. Our mistakes can bring us wisdom. Our shortfalls can remind us of gratitude. Compassion, humility, wisdom, and gratitude, born from an imperfect life, that's God's treasure in our clay jars. We become more authentically human and more powerfully reflect God's image when we have been broken and put back together again, not the same as we were beforehand, but much more beautiful. Just like Jesus still bears the wounds of salvation while he's living in eternity, our imperfections make us more authentically and beautifully human, reflecting the one whose face we bear. Because our brokenness can be a point of connection between us flawed human beings. Our shared experience of the limits of human life bring us together to share in common weakness so that we can be stronger together. It's from our grief that we can better understand someone else going through their own loss. It's from our own experience of failure that we can better comfort those who are going through their own defeats. It's from our own experience of brokenness and then being put back together again that we can help those who have been broken. And then our weaknesses make us strong. As Paul says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. Or as Ernest Hemingway put it in his famous quote, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. And that is you. You have been broken, and now you are strong in the broken places. You who have been afflicted in every way, but you have not been crushed. You have been perplexed that your life doesn't make sense, but you have not been driven to despair. You who have been forsaken by someone you loved. You who have suffered defeat after defeat after defeat, but you have not been destroyed. You bear the wounds of your own personal suffering on your body and in your spirit. And because of what God has done for you, the life of Jesus crucified and risen is visible in your life, as you are a living proclamation that Christ is risen, and that you have the power of his risen life in you. You hold God's treasure of life and salvation in the clay jars of your life. May that treasure shine through your weakness. May that light shine through your limitations. May that light shine through the broken pieces of your life that have been put back together into something new and more beautiful than it was when you were whole. And may this be so among us. Amen.